Welcome into Lunch and Learn. We're always talking to local folks doing local things in and around the local community. And today, for a series of days, we've invited candidates running for political office here in Manchester. We have mayor candidates and we have alderman candidates. We've invited everyone to come in and participate in our Lunch and Learn segment. Whether or not they take advantage of that opportunity is up to them. Today, we have Ryan French in studio, who is an incumbent alderman seeking another term. Ryan, how are you doing?
Doing well, Josh. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Thanks for stopping by. And I've done a couple of these already, and I always try to kind of start them off, especially with incumbents. It's like, all right, you've been doing this for X amount of years, which for you I think is 12.
11.
11.
Yeah, I got one of those weird terms at the beginning. I got a 3 and then a couple
okay,
4s.
So 11. And everybody says politics is such a headache.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it some more?
Well, I guess...
what do you want to do?
Yeah. I guess first and foremost, it's you got to love your community. Right now, I think Manchester's in a position, that we've worked towards for a number of years, COVID-19 obviously aside, to start leveraging some of the things, the foundation that we've put in place over the last couple 8 years or so. First, I'd be remiss by saying, congratulations on the radio station joining the small business community here in Manchester.
It is different.
Yeah, it is still media, but it's fun media, right?
It is.
It's radio is a lot more fun.
We have a lot of fun, and the whole business ownership thing is a blast.
Yeah.
But it definitely comes with its headaches at times.
Yeah, I'm definitely biased towards radio, but yeah, no, just back to you got to love your community. Like I said, I feel like we're in a position right now to really start taking advantage of a couple of the foundational pieces that we've put in place over the last several years, and just want to see those through because this has been a long process, kind of getting Manchester back on a financial track and get our taxes back in line where we need them to be, and making some investments that you see return on, and that's critical. There's different types of investments you can make, and I think we've made the right ones, and we're starting to see that return.
Yeah, and I actually just had Mayor Norman in not long ago, and he was talking about financial situations, saying, I don't know how many years ago it was, we only had $2 million or around there in reserves, and now we're up to around $7 million in reserves. So I imagine that is kind of a feather in the cap to be able to have that money there. And I asked him, and I'll ask you too, so when you say $7 million in reserves, is there a number that the city says, all right, we want to have X amount of dollars in reserves, and that's where we want to be? Is that a goal? Because I think for people, it's like, all right, if you got money in reserves, that's great because you can pay cash for fire trucks or police cars or whatever, and you don't have to get bonds issued. But taxpayers also can be like, well, why are you squirreling away my money?
Yeah.
Why don't we lower the tax rates?
Exactly. No. So that's a very good question and a very good observation too. I think it's twofold. If you'll go back to every single budget that we've ever passed, when we do the final budget amendment before we pass the budget for the next fiscal year, I'm always asking, what's the state level with our budget? Because the state recommends X amount % based on how much is in your budget. So it's essentially 25%. So right now, I believe we're setting, I think the state recommendation is about $3.5 million. To put things in perspective, we're at about 6.9. Now we're at 6.9 after a $4+ million reserve going into last year. So the way we've actually built these reserves are not necessarily by cutting back in the budgeting process, because if you remember, every year we kind of go through this gauntlet of, we passed a budget that dips into reserves, but yet we're still building reserves. How is that? Well, that's because we take this budget throughout the year. We're very cognizant of where we spend it, and we want to spend it on things that have return on investment. So, for example, the downtown area, we make those types of expenditures. We're not necessarily going to do the math on those returns for that very year, but over the next several years, you're going to see returns in the form of sales tax, things like that. So that's the funny thing about it. I don't know that we've passed a budget that hasn't had to quote unquote dip in reserves, but yet every single year we have an amendment at the end of the year.
The budgets are amended.
that we have reserves all of a sudden, and we've been able to save those. Now, first of all, so that 25% that the state recommends obviously doesn't have a recommendation based on a pandemic and what that's going to do to your economy. So right now we're in a position with the 6.9 this year that's going to allow us to run through this at least have the government run operationally through the pandemic without significant cuts, no cuts to services and things like that. We're going to freeze the budget, freeze spending, make sure that we're not, going above and beyond with expenditures right now. There was kind of some controversy about whether or not we should continue to fund the College Street elementary school expansion, for example. But we're in such a really good position financially. We can make those expenditures and still have that budget. Now, to the core of your question, what do we do? When's enough? We're at that point now where we can start making investments with this money, be that an investment to a tax cut, be that an investment to an infrastructure, long-term infrastructure plan, for example, like the Exit 105 sewer line. Those are types of things that now that we've got these reserves built up, we can actually make those expenditures into long-term planning. The ECD Commission, for example, we're going to have to fund that if we want that to be effective over the next couple of years. And if that's the case, then we've got these dollars to do it with now. So that's it. We've built these reserves up. I do expect to see us dip into those with the COVID-19 situation. We're obviously going to see a drop across the board in revenues, but now we weather that and start looking at these investments long term and how we're going to make them.
Looking at the next 4 years, what goal wise do you have personally and for the board?
Yeah.
Going forward, if you get 4 more years, what do you do with that time?
Yeah. So I think right now, I keep talking about the position we're in now. The next 4 years with the current structure of the board, the key word for what we do is collaboration. We really do work well together. It's the first time. I'll say this, in the 11 years that I've been here, the last 2 years have been the most fruitful because we have a board, I think, that is really, really dedicated to the idea of working together regardless of where our opinions are or where our political thoughts are. We just want to get things done for the community, and it's been a pleasure to serve with these folks. But yeah, the next 4 years, Exit 105, I'll get back to that. That's a topic I think that needs to be discussed in length. A lot of rumors and things like that as issues that surround issues all the time in local politics. But basically, we created a joint commission with the county. It was the first time I've seen that happen in a number of years. We created this joint committee to look in the idea of running a sewer line, basically all the way out to Exit 105 across the interstate and eventually hooking into the school system. And I think that's where growth is going to happen. I think it's residential growth that, there's some varying opinions of, the county wants to see that as an economic center. I want to see it as a residential center. But I think the key is put the sewer line on the ground and let the people determine what happens. So I want to see that happen. That's key for growth for our county. It's key for growth for the city. That's one of those things that if we don't do in 50 years, people are going to wonder why we didn't. If we do it in 50 years, you're going to see a large amount of growth out there, in my belief. Safety infrastructure is something that I've always been big on. Oakdale Street, I ran several years ago on getting sidewalks on Oakdale Street. Safe Routes to School program, we got those. We need an expansion. They need to run down in front of your building here, in fact.
No, a lot of kids after school walking through here.
Yeah, and the ditches are not.
They just kind of walk. They just kind of walk in our yard, which is fine.
Yeah, and there's not very friendly ditches over here either. You can break a leg jumping in those things. So that's one thing. I want to see the expansion of that program all the way down to the residential areas. It's great where it's at now, but it needs to expand all the way down the road. Hills Chapel Road, we just passed that. We're actually going to be building sidewalks all the way from Highway 41 to Forestwood Drive on Hills Chapel Road. It's going to be in 4 phases, I believe, is what it's going to boil down to.
Yeah, it's been talked about for a long time, or complained about.
Yeah. And the residential growth in that area is significant, so it warrants that. And I think that's certainly a safety issue. And over the next 4 years, also, I'd like to see investments not in, like I said, the ECD Commission. I think we need to have an investment in that, and we need to have an investment in the growth of outside impact. I think tourism is something that is often overlooked here, and I'm always on the stump for this. But tourism is $100 million economy for Coffee County each and every year, and it's growing rapidly. Now, how do you grow that? Well, there's several different ways. One, more hotels. We want to be attractive to more hotels. I know a lot of people don't.
You're going to hear this.
Yeah.
Well, all we have here are hotels and chicken restaurants and banks. You hear that a lot.
Yeah, we'll take a couple more chicken restaurants too. By the way, I'm not going to complain about that.
Right? But, hotels bring revenue. So,
yeah, hotels are,
and that's what you get on interstate town.
Oh man, yeah, that's what people ought to look at a hotel as just a massive influx of revenue for your community, and it's other people's money. That's the great thing about it is that we're able to do all these cool things in our community. community without spending local taxpayer dollars. And that's in fact, the state of Tennessee puts out an economic impact report every year on tourism, and travel expenditures in Coffee County save each taxpayer $396 a year right now in taxes. So that's not just $396. That's $396 that you would pay in taxes otherwise if we didn't have tourism. So it's a lucrative thing for our community, and we're geographically blessed. I mean, we're on the interstate. Two, we have Jack Daniel's, George Dickel right down the road that are massive draws for tourism. You got the South Cumberland natural area and state park in Grundy County. Obviously, we got Yellowstone Fort here. There's a lot of cool things to do in this area, and we actually benefit from those. The caverns down in Pelham, for example. Those are all things that we can leverage to continue to grow that sector and to grow that impact. So we can fund things that are quality of life initiatives, for example, and do that without spending local taxpayer dollars. So I think that's definitely. I'll give you one more example. I'm working with County Commissioner Jimmy Hollingsworth right now. We're putting together. We're in the early stages of this, but we're putting together letters to the state, TWRA, and TVA. We'd like to see a couple of access points on the Duck River so we can start utilizing. We have this beautiful river in our community, and we don't have a lot of good access to it. There's no reason that we shouldn't have 100 kayaks every Saturday and Sunday.
If you've been to McMinnville, in the old part, you're going like to the old part of town, the square, that bridge there before you go into. I didn't realize we went a couple weekends ago, and there's a
Smooth Rapids.
A lot of there was hundreds of people down there. Yeah,
and it's funny about that you bring that up because I remember having the conversation with Jimmy Haley. He was the city mayor at the time. Of course, he's county executive over there now. And that was one of their primary focuses was tourism. And that was one of the things that they wanted to see come out of that was a boating and day trip type adventure. And it worked. It worked well. It can work here. We have a lot of history and around the Duck River here with Native American grounds, Yellowstone Fort, things like that. So that's something to look forward to. But that takes collaboration. That takes the county and the city working together. That takes commissioners and aldermen working together, and that's important. And right now, I think more than anything, when you're looking to elect people, you need to be looking to elect people that are willing to work together. And I am not naive enough to think that in my first couple of years I was probably not one of those. But I learned quickly that if you want to get things done for your community, you have to work together. There's give and take in all of this.
A couple other things while we got you here. The Economic Community Development, the ECD program.
Yep.
You talked about that. Well, expand on that. What does that include? What does that look like? Because it's a buzzword you hear a lot, but what does that do for the city?
Yeah, and the goal is to make it not a buzzword, but an active commission. So I'll date back to when Alderman Roxanne Patton was still on the board of mayor and alderman and served with me. Her and I had a presentation to create an ECD commission and to hire a outside company to come in and do some different things across economic community development. But I think ECD and the definition of it is different for each community. For example, a lot of communities want to have an ECD commission and just they want to focus on big box retail. A lot of people bring an ECD commission, and that may be retirement. What does a retirement community look like? I think we got a unique mix here. We have an eclectic mix of local businesses. If you think about it, just kind of step back for a minute and think about neighboring communities and think about us. Look at all of the small mom and pop restaurants that we have, the mom and pop retail that we have. We have an amazing small business community here. So when I think of ECD and funding ECD moving forward, there's a couple different narratives. Some people are going to support hiring a person to be an ECD director. Some people are going to support what Roxanne and I proposed and having a company that will come in and do an analysis. But one of the things that it all boils down to is kind of centralizing that data, working with your partners like the Chamber of Commerce. And so, for example, in a proposal that we had, again, and I'm jumping back to that proposal because we don't have a proposal on the table right now moving forward. It's being put together. But one of the proposals in the past, having this company come in, they do an economic analysis. They do what they call gaps and leaks analysis. So they know what the gaps are in your economy, what the leaks are. Gap being something that you're not providing in your economy that is demanded, and a leak being something that you are providing but is leaking into another community for whatever reason. And so then it's important to sit down with your small business community, go over that, and let them grow their businesses. It's not just about bringing in the next big box retail. I mean, I would love to see some big box retail come in, some different, clothing options, things like that. I know there's a demand for a grocery store, but I wouldn't like to see it at the expense of small businesses.
Sure.
And the impact of that is the math of that doesn't make sense either. A small business, about 70% of everything, and again, you're a small business as well, versus a conglomerate radio station, for example. But around 70% of everything generating a small business stays in the community somehow, be that employees, their paychecks, be that the expenditures that you make when you go buy something to build a new desk or whatever. 70% of what small businesses earn stay in the community, where it's only about 15% for big box and big corporation. Again, not speaking against that, because we want that to fit, but we don't want it to fit at the expense of anything. So I think that's where ECD comes in, balancing these things. Who do we go after? What is the gaps and leaks? What does the data say? How can we have a fulfilled economy by balancing small businesses, growing small businesses, giving small businesses opportunity, like through the USDA small business grants that the ECD can leverage, and then how do we get into initiative type things like TIF grants and having people build here, and housing opportunities. It's various, but that's the point of the ECD Commission, and that's why I say, as a city, we have to be prepared when they come back with that finalized proposal. We have to be prepared to fund that, so we can expect the return on that investment.
City administrator has popped up and down and up and down and up and down over the past several years. Where do you stand on that? Because I've been all over the place, depending on who you talk to.
Well, let's do this interview, and then about 10 minutes, let's do another interview, and I might change. I listen. There are good arguments for it, good arguments against it. I think the proof is in the pudding. I think that there are positive examples of it happening in different communities and working well. Then there's negative examples of it not working. I think probably Manchester in the past was one of those negative examples. But as far as organization wise and moving a city forward, my stance on this in the midst of the discussion this last year, I was kind of in the middle of it. You had Alderman Nichols who was really for it, and you had a couple of aldermen that was really against it, and then my stance was, hey, how can we tie it into different positions? Could this be a city administrator that had some economic and community development responsibility? Could it be a joint ECD / admin position? So that was kind of the way I was looking at it. And then there's opinions on that. We sought after opinions from MTask on that very subject. Could we do a joint position? You had somebody from MTask tells absolutely not. Then you had someone from MTask saying absolutely. This is multiple examples of how we've utilized this in other places. So I would fall there. I think that, I'm not against the idea of having an administrator. I just think that it has to fit into the role of what we're trying to do. And also right now, it's hard to have that discussion when you have such strong department heads like we do right now, because we all think that they do a great job, but, and an admin could come in and probably solve some problems if there was problems, but, I would fall in the middle of that. I wouldn't be against it, but I would need to see that position kind of do more. And that's just because we're a small town still. I don't think that's a lot of money to put into just administration. I think that it would need to be very flexible at the very least.
Hard to believe we're close to out of time. Any other things you want to touch on real quick before we get you out of here?
Yeah, no, just the last issue before we cover, and I think I've covered them all, but other than education, I think that's one thing that we always need to be looking forward to. I think COVID-19 has given us a situation to kind of step back and look at how education is going to change. Man, can you imagine if we had more access to Wi-Fi, how much easier it would have been for students to have access to their teachers and things like that. Our school system did a wonderful job here with packets and staying in communication with parents. So that's another issue I'd like to see us address, is kind of a Wi-Fi plan for the city moving forward, especially for students and access for education. I think it's critical in the next phase of where education is going, and I think probably COVID-19 has accelerated that pace and shown us a way that we can see things moving in the future.
All right, Ron French, City Alderman running for re-election, has been our guest today on Lunch and Learn. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, Josh.